He only wanted to save his son, but when a desperate Comanche warrior knelt before a grieving mother and begged for her milk, their worlds collided in a way no one could accept. She had just lost her own baby, her body still full of life, her heart hollowed by death. But she chose to give, not just milk, but a second chance. That single act of compassion sparked a dangerous chase across deserts and sacred lands. Because in the eyes of his tribe, the child was now impure and had to die. What followed was a journey of survival, forbidden love, and a mother's final stand between life and death. This is a story about pain, exile, and impossible choices. But more than anything, it's about love that refuses to be denied. If you believe love is stronger than hate, comment below and stay with us. This story will leave a mark you won't forget. The abandoned ranch had no soul left in it anymore. Sun-bleached fence posts stood crooked against the endless Wyoming sky, and the wind howled through broken shutters of a homestead long forgotten. Scorched earth stretched toward distant mountains, marked only by the scattered bones of cattle that had died in the drought 3 summers past. On the sagging porch steps, she sat alone. Charlotte's skin, once fair and soft, now looked translucent in the harsh afternoon light. Her auburn hair hung limp around her shoulders, unwashed for days. Her hands trembled as they clutched a tiny blanket, impossibly small, still creased where it had once folded around a newborn's body. Only now the blanket was empty. Her eyes were swollen and red, but dry. She had cried so much over the past 3 days that no more tears would come. Her gaze fixed on nothing, hollow and haunted. Beneath her cotton blouse, her breasts ached with milk that would never be drunk. A cruel irony to have the body of a mother, but no child to feed. The baby had lived only 2 hours. Born too early, too small, his lungs never strong enough for this harsh world. She had held him as he slipped away, whispering promises she couldn't keep, singing lullabies to silence. Her husband Thomas lay buried beside their son in the small cemetery behind the barn, killed defending the ranch from raiders just a week before the birth. She was utterly alone now, with nothing but milk-heavy breasts and a broken heart. Then she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats, distant but approaching fast across the hard-pan earth. Charlotte lifted her head slowly, squinting against the sun's glare. Through the heat shimmer came a rider, moving with desperate urgency. As he drew closer, she could see him clearly. A Comanche warrior, his long black hair flowing behind him like a dark banner. His horse was lathered with sweat, and in his arms, wrapped in a tattered hide sling, was something that made her breath catch. A baby, and it was crying. The warrior's eyes found hers across the distance, and in that moment, Charlotte knew her life was about to change forever. Her body tensed, her heart hammered against her ribs, and somewhere deep in her chest, a maternal instinct she thought had died with her son began to stir. What happened next would defy every law of God and man. The Comanche warrior slid from his horse before the animal had fully stopped, his moccasined feet hitting the dusty ground with practiced silence. Charlotte remained frozen on the porch steps, her knuckles white as she gripped the empty blanket. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to find Thomas's rifle and defend herself. But she couldn't move. The baby in the warrior's arms was wailing now, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the desert air like a blade. It was the cry of hunger that had gone too long, of a small body slowly giving up its fight for life. Charlotte knew that sound. She had heard it in her nightmares for 3 days straight. The warrior approached slowly, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening, despite the knife at his belt and the bow across his back. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 30 summers, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that held depths of exhaustion she recognized. His buckskin clothes were travel-stained and torn, his long hair matted with dust and sweat. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he was 20 feet away, he stopped. His gaze moved from Charlotte's face to the blanket in her arms, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Understanding. Recognition of grief that matched his own. "Please," he said, and his voice cracked like a boy's, though he was clearly a man grown. The single word hung between them, heavy with desperation. Charlotte's throat worked, but no sound came out. The baby's cries grew weaker, more pitiful. The warrior took another step closer, then dropped to one knee in the dust. The gesture was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Charlotte's breath caught. Warriors didn't kneel, not to anyone, and certainly not to a white woman sitting alone on a broken porch. "My son," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. He needs—" His voice failed him, and he looked down at the bundle in his arms. When he raised his eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Milk? He needs milk." The word hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Her hand flew instinctively to her chest where her breasts ached with fullness. Milk. She had milk, more than her body knew what to do with, but no baby to give it to. "I don't—" she started, then stopped. What was she going to say? That she didn't understand? That she couldn't help? The lies died on her lips as the baby's cries grew even fainter. The warrior shifted the bundle in his arms, and Charlotte caught a glimpse of tiny fingers, blue-tinged from cold despite the heat of the day. The child was dying. Anyone could see that. "His mother," the warrior continued, his voice steadier now, as if kneeling had somehow given him strength. "She died bringing him into this world. 3 days ago. I have tried everything. Goat's milk, mare's milk, broths and teas the medicine women make. Nothing. He grows weaker." Charlotte's heart clenched. 3 days. The same 3 days she had been mourning her own loss. "My people," the warrior said, and now his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They say a motherless child brings bad fortune, that he should be allowed to join her in the spirit world." His arms tightened protectively around the baby. "But I cannot let him die." "What's his name?" Charlotte asked suddenly. The question surprised her as much as it did the warrior. He looked up, blinking. He has no name yet. In my tribe, children are not named until their 5th day, when we know they will live." His voice broke slightly. "Tomorrow is his 5th day." Charlotte stared at the bundle in his arms. No name. A baby with no name. Dying because there was no woman to feed him. Her breast throbbed with sympathetic pain. "What's your name?" she asked. "I am Running Wolf of the COMANCHE," he replied, then hesitated. "And you are—" "Charlotte," she said simply. "Charlotte Whitmore." They looked at each other across the space that separated them. 20 feet of dusty ground that might as well have been an ocean. A white woman and a Comanche warrior. Natural enemies according to everything she had been taught. But all Charlotte could see was a father trying to save his son. The baby's cries had faded to weak whimpers now. Charlotte could see his tiny chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. He was running out of time. "The nearest town is 3 days' ride," she said quietly. "There's no wet nurse there. No women with babies." Running Wolf nodded grimly. "I know. I have looked. You are—" He paused, as if the words were difficult. "You are the only one." Charlotte's hand moved to her blouse, then stopped. This was madness. She was a Christian woman, a rancher's widow. What he was asking, it went against everything she had been raised to believe about propriety, about race, about the natural order of things. But the baby was dying, and she had milk. "If I—" She started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Running Wolf seemed to understand. "It would be a sacred gift," he said solemnly. "I would be in your debt for all my days." Charlotte looked down at the empty blanket in her lap, then back at the warrior kneeling in her yard with his dying son. She thought of her own baby, cold in the ground beside his father. She thought of the milk that filled her breast with pain every few hours. Milk that served no purpose now except to remind her of what she had lost. Maybe it could serve a purpose after all. Slowly, carefully, she set the empty blanket aside and stood up. Running Wolf watched her with eyes that held a mixture of hope and fear, as if he was afraid to believe she might actually help. Charlotte walked down the porch steps, her bare feet silent on the sun-warmed wood. She approached the kneeling warrior until she was close enough to see the baby clearly. He was beautiful, even dying, even blue with cold and weak with hunger. He was perfect, tiny and delicate, with his father's high cheekbones and a shock of fine black hair. His eyes were closed, his little mouth moving in the instinctive suckling motion that all babies made, searching for something that wasn't there. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Running Wolf looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw such gratitude, such overwhelming relief that it took her breath away. Without a word, he carefully transferred the baby into her arms. The child was so light, so fragile. Charlotte had forgotten how small newborns were, how they seemed like they might break if you held them too tightly. But as soon as she cradled him against her chest, something inside her shifted. Some maternal instinct that had been dormant since her own son's death suddenly roared to life. The baby stirred in her arms, turning his head toward her chest with that instinctive, seeking motion. He could smell the milk, she realized. Even dying, his body knew what it needed. Charlotte looked down at Running Wolf, still kneeling in the dust. "What I'm about to do," she said quietly, "will change everything. You understand that?" He nodded gravely. "I understand." She began to unbutton her blouse with trembling fingers. "In your tribe," she asked as she worked, "what happens to a child who drinks from the breast of an outsider?" Running Wolf's expression darkened. "It is forbidden," he said simply. "The elders would say he is no longer pure Comanche. They would—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish. "They would kill him," Charlotte said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Running Wolf whispered. Charlotte nodded and finished unbuttoning her blouse. Her full breast, pale and heavy with milk, was exposed to the air. The baby in her arms sensed what was coming and began to move more urgently, his tiny mouth opening and closing. "Then we'll have to make sure they never find out," she said, and brought the dying infant to her breast. The moment the baby's mouth found her nipple, everything changed. He latched on with surprising strength for one so weak, and Charlotte felt the familiar tug and release as her milk began to flow. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Relief from the physical pain of engorgement, but more than that, relief from a deeper ache she hadn't even known she was carrying. Running Wolf made a sound that might have been a sob or a prayer. The baby suckled hungrily, desperately, making small sounds of satisfaction as warm milk filled his empty stomach. Color began to return to his tiny cheeks, and his breathing deepened and steadied. Charlotte looked down at the child in her arms, this nameless Comanche baby who had found life at her breast, and felt something stir in her heart that had been dead for 3 days. Purpose, meaning, the fierce, protective love that only mothers understood. When she looked up, she found Running Wolf watching her with an expression of such raw gratitude and wonder that it made her eyes sting with tears she thought were all used up. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." But Charlotte didn't know that in saving this child's life, she had just signed both their death warrants. Because 20 miles to the south, 4 Comanche warriors were already riding hard toward the abandoned Whitmore Ranch, and their orders were simple. Find Running Wolf, kill the child, and eliminate anyone who stood in their way. What she was about to discover would change everything she thought she knew about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be a mother. The baby nursed for nearly an hour, his tiny hands curled against Charlotte's pale breasts as he drank with the desperate hunger of the nearly starved. With each passing minute, his skin grew pinker, his breathing stronger. Life was returning to him one drop at a time. Charlotte had forgotten this feeling, the profound satisfaction of nourishing another human being with her own body. The gentle tug and release, the warm weight of a child in her arms, the way a baby's whole world narrowed to nothing but milk and comfort and safety. For the first time in 3 days, the constant ache in her chest began to ease. Running Wolf had not moved from his position in the dust. He knelt there watching in reverent silence, his weathered hands pressed together in what Charlotte realized was prayer. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words in the Comanche tongue she couldn't understand, but the gratitude in his posture was unmistakable. When the baby finally fell asleep, his rosebud mouth slipping away from her nipple with a contented sigh, Charlotte carefully adjusted her blouse and looked down at the peaceful face in her arms. Color had returned to his cheeks, and his breathing was deep and even. He looked like any sleeping infant, perfect, innocent, unaware that he had just broken one of the most sacred laws of his people. "He's beautiful," Charlotte whispered, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Running Wolf finally rose from his knees, dust falling from his buckskins as he stood. "He looks like his mother," he said quietly. She was the most beautiful woman in our band. Hair like obsidian, eyes like still water." His voice caught slightly. "She would have been a good mother." "What was her name?" "Morning Star." Running Wolf moved closer, careful not to startle Charlotte or wake the baby. "She died as the sun rose on the day he was born. The medicine woman said it was a sign that he carried both darkness and light within him." Charlotte looked down at the sleeping infant. In the soft afternoon light, his features were serene, angelic almost. It was hard to imagine anyone wanting to harm something so innocent. "You said tomorrow is his 5th day," she said. "If he has no name by then—" "He dies," Running Wolf finished grimly. "It is the way of my people. A child who cannot survive 5 days is not meant for this world." He paused, his dark eyes studying Charlotte's face. "But you have changed that. You have given him strength. What will you name him?" Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the baby to Charlotte and back again. "I had thought to call him Swift Arrow, for he came into this world quickly, like an arrow from the bow." He hesitated. "But now, perhaps Hope." Charlotte's breath caught. "Hope? It is what you have given him, what you have given me." Running Wolf's voice was soft, reverent. "In my language, we would say Pia Tua, the one who brings hope." "Hope," Charlotte repeated, testing the name. It felt right somehow, settling into her heart like a key finding its lock. She looked down at the sleeping baby, at Hope, and smiled for the first time in days. But her smile faded as she noticed something else. The sky to the south had grown hazy with dust. Not the natural heat shimmer of the desert, but something else. Something moving fast across the plains. Running Wolf followed her gaze and went very still. His hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt, and Charlotte saw his jaw tighten. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "Riders," he said grimly. "Coming this way." Charlotte's arms tightened protectively around the baby. "Your people?" "Yes." Running Wolf's voice was flat, emotionless, but Charlotte could see the tension coiling through his body like a snake preparing to strike. "4 of them, by the look of the dust cloud. Warriors from my band." "How do you know?" "Because I know their horses. I know the way they ride." He turned to face her, and Charlotte saw something that might have been fear flicker in his dark eyes. "They have come for him." Charlotte looked down at Hope, still sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware that death was riding toward them across the desert. "Will they kill him?" "They will try." Running Wolf's hand tightened on his knife. "The elders sent them, I think, to bring me back in shame and to end his suffering." "But he's not suffering now," Charlotte protested. "He's strong. He's healthy. Look at him." "It does not matter." Running Wolf's voice was bitter. "To them, he is already dead. The moment he drank from the breast of a white woman, he ceased to be Comanche in their eyes." Charlotte stood up suddenly, startling the baby. Hope whimpered but didn't wake, instinctively nuzzling closer to her warmth. "Then we don't let them take him." Running Wolf stared at her. "You do not understand. These are not ordinary men. They are warriors, trained from childhood to track and kill. They will not be turned away by words." "Then we run." The suggestion hung between them like a challenge. Running Wolf's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been admiration. "You would do that?" he asked quietly. "Leave your home, your life, everything you know, for a child that is not yours?" Charlotte looked down at Hope, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against her chest. 3 hours ago, she had been alone in the world, drowning in grief with nothing but empty arms and a broken heart. Now she held new life, precious and fragile, and completely dependent on her protection. "He is mine now," she said simply. "From the moment I gave him my milk, he became mine, and I don't abandon my children." Something shifted in Running Wolf's expression, surprise giving way to respect, respect deepening into something warmer. "You speak like a true mother." "I am a true mother," Charlotte said fiercely, "and no one is taking my son." The word hung between them, son, Not the baby or the child, but son. Charlotte had claimed him, completely and without reservation, and Running Wolf could see the truth of it burning in her eyes. "If we run," he said slowly, "there will be no going back. Once they know you have fed him, you will be marked as an enemy of the Comanche. They will hunt you wherever you go." "Let them hunt," Charlotte said grimly. "I've lost everything that mattered to me. Everything except him." She shifted hope slightly, adjusting the makeshift blanket around his small body. "Where can we go?" Running Wolf was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "There are places," he said finally, "sacred places where even warriors fear to tread, canyons where the old spirits dwell, where the laws of men hold less power than the laws of the earth itself." "How far?" "2 days' ride north, through the Badlands. Hard country, but if we can reach the Red Canyons—" He trailed off, then met her eyes. "It will be dangerous, more dangerous than staying here and facing them." Charlotte looked out at the dust cloud growing larger on the horizon. Soon she would be able to see the individual riders, and then it would be too late to run. "How long do we have?" she asked. "An hour, maybe less." Charlotte nodded and started toward the house. "Then we need to move fast. I need supplies. Food, water, blankets for Hope." "Charlotte!" Running Wolf's voice stopped her at the porch steps. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You should know," he said quietly, "that if we do this, if we run together, in the eyes of my people, you will be my woman. A Comanche warrior does not travel alone with a white woman unless she belongs to him." Heat flooded Charlotte's cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "And what do you think about that?" Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face completely, erasing the lines of grief and exhaustion and revealing the man he must have been before sorrow carved itself into his features. "I think," he said softly, "that any man would be honored to call you his woman." Charlotte felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with maternal instinct and everything to do with the way Running Wolf was looking at her. Not as a white woman or an enemy or a stranger, but as a woman worth protecting, worth choosing. She had thought that part of her died with Thomas. She had been wrong. "Then let's go save our son," she said, and disappeared into the house to gather what they would need for the journey ahead. But as she moved through the familiar rooms of her home, packing food and blankets and the few precious things she couldn't bear to leave behind, Charlotte didn't know that salvation lay not in running, but in standing, in fighting. The sacred canyons Running Wolf spoke of held more than just refuge from human law. They held ancient powers that would test every bond between them. And before this was over, Charlotte would have to choose between the life she had known and the love she never saw coming. The war drums in the distance were growing louder, and time was running out. Charlotte moved through her house like a woman possessed, grabbing everything they would need for the journey ahead. Into Thomas's old saddlebags went strips of dried beef, hardtack biscuits, a water skin, matches wrapped in oilcloth, and a spare blanket. From her bedroom chest, she retrieved the small leather pouch that held their life savings. $43 in gold coins that would have to last them however long they were gone, if they ever came back at all. Hope slept peacefully in the wicker basket she had prepared for her own son, wrapped in the softest blankets she owned. The irony wasn't lost on her. The cradle meant for one child was now sheltering another, and somehow that felt like a blessing rather than a curse. Through the window, she could see the dust cloud growing larger. Individual shapes were becoming visible now. 4 riders pushing their horses hard across the desert floor. They would be here soon. "Charlotte!" Running Wolf's voice called from outside, sharp with urgency. "We must go now." She snatched up the basket and the saddlebags and ran outside. Running Wolf had brought his horse to the front porch. A magnificent painted stallion with intelligent eyes and powerful haunches built for speed and endurance. The animal was breathing hard from their earlier ride, but its ears were pricked forward, ready for whatever came next. "Can you ride?" Running Wolf asked, taking the saddlebags from her and securing them behind the saddle. "I've been riding since I was 6, Charlotte replied grimly. "But not with a baby. You hold him, I'll hold you." Running Wolf swung up onto the stallion's back and reached down for her. "Trust me." Charlotte looked into his dark eyes and saw nothing but steady determination. She had known this man for less than 4 hours, but somehow she did trust him. With her life, with Hope's life, with everything. She handed him the basket, then grasped his outstretched hand and let him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under their combined weight but held steady. Running Wolf settled the basket carefully in front of him, one arm curved protectively around it while the other held the reins. "Hold tight to me," he said. "Do not let go, no matter what happens." Charlotte wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of his body beneath the buckskin shirt. The horse beneath them was like coiled lightning, ready to explode into motion at his master's command. "Where are we going?" she asked. "North to the Red Canyons. But first we must lose them in the Badlands." Running Wolf turned his head slightly, listening to something she couldn't hear. "They are close now, very close." As if summoned by his words, 4 riders crested the hill behind the ranch house. Even at a distance, Charlotte could see they were warriors. Paint-streaked faces, weapons gleaming in the afternoon sun, horses bred for war rather than work. They sat their mounts like centaurs, man and beast moving as one deadly unit. One of them pointed toward the house and let out a war cry that raised the hair on Charlotte's arms. "Go!" she breathed. Running Wolf didn't need to be told twice. He gave a sharp whistle, and the stallion launched forward like an arrow from a bow. Charlotte's arms tightened around Running Wolf's waist as they flew across the hard-pan earth, the ranch house falling away behind them with startling speed. The baby began to cry from the sudden motion and noise. Charlotte could see him squirming in the basket, his tiny fists waving in distress. Her heart clenched. He needed to be soothed, needed to be fed again soon. But there was no time for such luxuries now. Behind them, she heard the thundering of hooves as their pursuers gave chase. "How fast can they go?" she shouted over the wind. "Fast enough," Running Wolf called back grimly. "But Thunder knows this land better than they do. We have a chance." They raced across the desert floor, weaving between scrub brush and rocky outcroppings, following game trails that were invisible to Charlotte's eyes but apparently clear as highways to Running Wolf. The horse moved with fluid grace despite carrying 2 adults and an infant, his powerful legs eating up the miles with tireless efficiency. Charlotte risked a glance back and immediately wished she hadn't. The warriors were gaining on them, their horses leaner and faster than Thunder, bred specifically for pursuit. War paint streaked their faces in patterns she didn't recognize, and sunlight glinted off the metal points of their spears. "They're getting closer," she yelled. "I know." Running Wolf's voice was tight with concentration. "Hold on. We're going into the maze." Charlotte didn't know what he meant until they plunged into a landscape that looked like it had been carved by a mad god. Towering sandstone pillars rose from the desert floor like ancient sentinels, their surfaces carved by wind and water into fantastic shapes. Narrow passages wound between them like a labyrinth, some so tight that Charlotte's knees nearly scraped the rock walls as they passed through. Thunder navigated the maze with sure-footed precision, never hesitating at the countless forks and turns that branched off in all directions. Behind them, Charlotte could hear the pursuit faltering as their enemies were forced to slow down in the treacherous terrain. "This is good," Running Wolf said, some of the tension leaving his voice. "They cannot ride as fast here. We are gaining ground." But as they emerged from a particularly narrow passage, Charlotte saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the warriors had somehow gotten ahead of them, positioning himself at the mouth of a canyon that seemed to be their only way forward. He sat motionless on his horse, spear raised, painted face set in grim determination. "Behind us!" she warned, but Running Wolf had already seen the trap. Without hesitation, he veered Thunder to the right, away from the canyon mouth and toward what looked like solid cliff face. Charlotte was about to protest when she saw it. A crack in the rock, barely wide enough for a horse and rider, hidden in shadow until they were almost on top of it. They plunged into the narrow defile, and suddenly the world went dim and cool. Rock walls towered above them on both sides, so close Charlotte could have reached out and touched them. The horse's hooves echoed strangely in the confined space, and Hope's cries seemed amplified by the stone. "Is this the way to the Red Canyons?" Charlotte asked. "No," Running Wolf admitted. "This is the long way, the hard way. but it is the only way they will not expect us to go. They rode through the hidden passage for what felt like hours, though Charlotte knew it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. The walls gradually widened, and she began to see patches of sky overhead. Finally, they emerged into a small valley she had never seen before, surrounded by red cliffs and dotted with scraggly juniper trees. Running Wolf brought Thunder to a stop beside a small spring that bubbled up from the rocks. The horse immediately lowered his head to drink, his flanks heaving from the hard run. "We rest here," Running Wolf said, swinging down from the saddle. "Thunder needs water, and the baby needs to be fed." Charlotte slid down from the horse's back, her legs shaky from the ride and the adrenaline. Running Wolf lifted the basket carefully and handed it to her. Hope was crying in earnest now, his face red with hunger and distress. "Poor little one," Charlotte murmured, settling herself on a flat rock beside the spring. I know you're scared." She quickly unbuttoned her blouse and lifted Hope from the basket. The moment he caught the scent of milk, his cries quieted to whimpers. When she brought him to her breast, he latched on eagerly, his tiny hands kneading against her skin. Running Wolf busied himself checking Thunder's legs and hooves, but Charlotte caught him glancing over at her and the baby with an expression of profound tenderness. In the soft light of the hidden valley, with Hope nursing contentedly in her arms, it was almost possible to forget they were running for their lives. "How did you know about that passage?" she asked. "My grandfather showed me when I was a boy," Running Wolf replied, moving to check the saddlebags. "He used to bring me here to teach me about the old ways, the stories of our people." He looked around the valley with something that might have been nostalgia. "I have not been here in many years." "It's beautiful," Charlotte said, and meant it. Despite their circumstances, there was something peaceful about this place, something that spoke of ancient sanctity and protection. "Yes," Running Wolf agreed. "My grandfather called it the Heart of Stone. He said it was a place where the earth remembers how to love." Hope finished nursing and fell asleep in Charlotte's arms, his belly full and his breathing easy. Charlotte looked down at his peaceful face and felt that fierce protective instinct flare again in her chest. Whatever it took, wherever they had to go, she would keep him safe. "How far to the Red Canyons?" she asked. Running Wolf looked up at the sky, gauging the position of the sun. "If we push hard, we can be there by tomorrow night. But it will not be easy. The land between here and there is harsh, and our pursuers know we must go north eventually." "Will they follow us into the sacred places?" "Some will," Running Wolf said grimly. "Warriors like these, trained by the war chiefs, they fear nothing in this world. But the Red Canyons, they hold powers older than the Comanche, older than any tribe. Even the bravest warrior thinks twice before entering such places." Charlotte adjusted Hope more comfortably in her arms. "And you? Are you afraid?" Running Wolf met her eyes across the small space that separated them. "I am afraid of many things," he said quietly. "I am afraid they will catch us. I am afraid they will hurt you. I am afraid I will fail to protect my son." He paused. "But I am not afraid of the spirits in the canyons. They judge the heart, not the blood. And our hearts are pure in this." Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Our hearts. He spoke of them as a unit now, a family bound together by more than just circumstance. "Then that's where we'll go," she said simply. Running Wolf nodded and began gathering their supplies. "We should move soon. They will not stay confused by the maze forever, and when they find our trail again—" He didn't need to finish. Charlotte understood. The chase was far from over, and their real test was still ahead. But as she looked down at Hope sleeping trustingly in her arms, she knew with absolute certainty that she would face whatever came next. Ancient spirits, Comanche warriors, the judgment of gods and men, none of it mattered as much as the small life she now held. She had found her purpose again, and she would not let anyone take it from her, not even death itself. They rode through the night, following ancient trails that seemed to exist more in Running Wolf's memory than on the actual ground. The moon was full, casting silver light across the increasingly rugged landscape as they climbed higher into the Badlands. Charlotte dozed fitfully against Running Wolf's back, jolting awake each time thunder stumbled on the rocky path or whenever hope stirred in the basket. By dawn, they had reached the edge of something that took Charlotte's breath away. The red canyon stretched before them like a wound in the earth itself, carved from stone the color of dried blood. Towering mesas rose from the canyon floor like ancient temples, their faces carved with patterns that might have been natural or might have been the work of hands older than memory. The air itself felt different here, thinner, charged with an energy that made the hair on Charlotte's arms stand on end. "This is it," Running Wolf said quietly, his voice filled with a reverence she had never heard before. "Tuyaweta, the place where spirits walk." Charlotte stared into the maze of red stone corridors that branched off in all directions. Some were wide enough for a dozen riders, others so narrow that thunder would barely fit through. All of them seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if the stone itself was breathing. "It's," she began, then found she had no words for what she was seeing. "Sacred," Running Wolf finished for her, "and dangerous. The spirits here are old, older than the Comanche, older than any people who walk this earth. They do not judge by the color of skin or the tribe of birth. They judge by the truth of the heart." Hope whimpered in the basket, and Charlotte reached down to stroke his soft cheek. Even the baby seemed to sense something different about this place. His dark eyes were wide and alert, staring up at the towering red walls, as if he could see things that remained invisible to adult eyes. "What kind of judgment?" Charlotte asked. Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something far in the distance. "My grandfather told me stories," he said finally, "of warriors who came here to prove their worth, couples who sought blessing for their union, children who needed to find their true names. Some passed the test, others," he shrugged, "their bones still lie in the deep places, warning others to turn back." Charlotte felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "And you think we'll pass?" "I think," Running Wolf said slowly, "that we have no choice but to try." They began their descent into the canyons, following a switchback trail that had been carved into the cliff face so long ago that it had become part of the stone itself. Thunder picked his way carefully down the narrow path, his hooves ringing against the rock with each step. The sound echoed strangely in the confined space, bouncing off the walls and returning as whispers and sighs. As they went deeper, Charlotte began to notice things that made her uneasy. Caves dotted the canyon walls, their openings dark as empty eye sockets. Some contained what looked like ancient paintings, handprints in red ochre, spiral patterns, stick figures engaged in hunts or battles or rituals she couldn't interpret. Others held piles of bleached bones that might have belonged to animals or might not. The trail leveled out on the canyon floor, and suddenly they were surrounded by towers of stone that rose hundreds of feet into the sky. The silence here was profound, broken only by the soft sound of thunder's hooves on sand and the distant call of a hawk circling somewhere high above. "We need to find water," Running Wolf said, scanning the canyon walls. "Thunder is thirsty, and you will need to feed hope again soon." As if summoned by his words, they heard it, the musical trickle of running water echoing from somewhere ahead. They followed the sound through a narrow passage between two towering spires and emerged into a circular clearing dominated by a natural spring. But they were not alone. 4 figures sat arranged in a perfect circle around the spring, motionless as statues. For a heart-stopping moment, Charlotte thought they had walked into an ambush. Then she realized these were not the warriors who had been pursuing them. These figures were older, their faces painted with symbols she didn't recognize, their clothes made from materials she couldn't identify. They sat so still they might have been carved from the stone itself. Running Wolf brought Thunder to an abrupt stop, his body going rigid with tension. Charlotte felt his sharp intake of breath and knew that whatever this was, it was not part of his plan. "Elders," he whispered, and Charlotte heard both awe and fear in his voice. One of the figures raised his head. His face was ancient beyond counting, lined with wrinkles that formed patterns like the carved symbols on the canyon walls. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through stone caverns. "Running Wolf of the Katsutika," he said, "you have brought strangers to the sacred place." "I have brought family," Running Wolf replied, his voice steady despite the tension Charlotte could feel in his body. "My son, and the woman who gave him life." The elder's gaze moved to Charlotte, and she felt as if he was looking not just at her face, but into her very soul. His eyes were black as obsidian and seemed to hold depths that went on forever. "White woman," he said, "you carry a Comanche child." "I carry my son," Charlotte said firmly, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Blood doesn't make a family. Love does." The elder's expression didn't change, but Charlotte thought she saw something flicker in those ancient eyes. "The child has drunk from your breast?" "Yes," Charlotte said without hesitation, "and I would do it again. Even knowing it marks him as impure in the eyes of his people." Charlotte's arms tightened protectively around the basket. Hope was awake now, making soft, gurgling sounds as he looked up at the towering canyon walls. The only thing impure is a world that would let a child die for the sake of tradition. This time the elder's lips quirked slightly. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "Wisdom from an unexpected source," he said. "Tell me, white woman, what do you see when you look at this child?" Charlotte looked down at Hope, meeting his dark, curious gaze. "I see my son," she said simply. "I see a child who was dying and is now alive. I see hope where there was none. And you, Running Wolf?" The elder's attention shifted back to the warrior. "What do you see?" "I see the sun Morning Star gave her life to bring into this world," Running Wolf said. "I see the future of our people, if we are wise enough to embrace it instead of destroy it." The elder nodded slowly. "The spirits have been watching your journey," he said. "They have seen the sacrifice, the courage, the love that brought you here. But they have also seen the pursuit that follows. 4 warriors ride hard toward this place, carrying orders to spill blood on sacred ground." Charlotte felt her heart sink. "They followed us here?" "They will arrive before the sun reaches its highest point." Another elder spoke for the first time, her voice like wind through dry leaves. "The question is not whether they will come, but what you will do when they arrive." "We'll fight," Charlotte said immediately. "We'll protect hope, whatever it takes." "Violence is forbidden in this place," the first elder said sternly. "No blood may be spilled here without consequence." "Then what do you suggest?" Running Wolf asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "They will not listen to words. They have come to kill." The elder gestured toward the spring at the center of the circle. The water was crystal clear, so pure that Charlotte could see every grain of sand on the bottom. But as she watched, the surface began to change, showing images like a mirror that reflected not the present, but possibilities. She saw herself standing at the edge of the spring, hope in her arms, facing 4 painted warriors with murder in their eyes. She saw Running Wolf stepping between them, his hands empty of weapons. She saw words being spoken, challenges issued, ancient laws invoked. And then she saw something else, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "The test of truth," the elder said, as if reading her thoughts. "It is the oldest law of this place. When blood calls for blood, but violence is forbidden, truth must decide the outcome." "What kind of test?" Running Wolf asked. "The Mother Spring will judge," the elder replied. "Both sides will state their case, and the water will show what lies in their hearts. Truth will triumph over falsehood, love over hate, justice over tradition." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. "And if we lose?" The elder's expression was grave. "Then you will face the consequences of breaking tribal law. The child will die, and you with him. And if we win, then the warriors will be bound by the judgment of the spirits themselves. They will return to their people and speak of what they have seen. The child will be recognized as blessed, not cursed, and your union will be sanctified by powers older than any human law." Charlotte looked at Running Wolf, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his dark eyes. This was not the refuge they had hoped to find, but another trial, perhaps the most dangerous one yet. Hope began to fuss, and Charlotte realized it had been hours since she had last fed him. Her breasts were heavy with milk, aching with the familiar pressure that only a nursing child could relieve. "He needs to eat," she said. "Then feed him," the elder said simply. "Here, before us all. Let the spirits see the bond that brought you to this place." Charlotte hesitated for only a moment, then began to unbutton her blouse. The elders watched without embarrassment or shame as she bared her breast and brought hope to her nipple. The baby latched immediately, and the familiar tug of milk letting down sent waves of relief through Charlotte's body. As Hope nursed, the spring began to glow with a soft, pearl-like light. The elders leaned forward slightly, their ancient faces filled with wonder. "The spirits approve," the female elder whispered. "They see the sacred bond between mother and child, regardless of blood." But even as she spoke, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the canyon entrance. Their pursuers had arrived and the real test was about to begin. Running Wolf's hand moved to his knife, then stopped as he remembered where they were. No violence was permitted in this sacred place. They would have to face their enemies with nothing but truth and courage. Charlotte looked down at Hope, still nursing peacefully at her breast, then up at Running Wolf's tense face. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The test of truth was about to begin, and their very lives hung in the balance. The four warriors rode into the sacred clearing like harbingers of death, their painted faces streaked with sweat and dust from the hard pursuit. Their horses snorted and stamped, sensing the ancient power that permeated this place, but unable to understand it. The lead warrior, a man with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, raised his hand to halt the others. His eyes found Running Wolf first, then moved to Charlotte still nursing Hope by the glowing spring. His expression twisted with disgust and rage. "Stone Bear," Running Wolf said quietly, recognizing the scarred warrior. "I should have known they would send you." "You dishonor us all with your presence here," Stone Bear replied, his voice like grinding gravel. He swung down from his horse, his three companions following suit. "And you defile this sacred place by bringing that abomination." Charlotte's arms tightened protectively around Hope, who continued nursing peacefully, unaware of the hatred directed toward him. She felt Running Wolf's body coil with tension beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward his knife before remembering where they were. The eldest of the ancient elders rose slowly from his position by the spring, his movements deliberate and commanding. Despite his advanced age, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. "Stone Bear of the Katsoteca," the elder said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You stand on ground made sacred by spirits older than your bloodline. Here, the laws of men bow to the laws of the earth itself." Stone Bear's lip curled in a sneer, but Charlotte noticed he didn't step any closer to the spring. "I acknowledge the sacred nature of this place, Ancient One, but I have orders from the war chief himself. The child is corrupted, and the corruption must be cut out before it spreads." "The child you speak of has a name," Charlotte said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. She carefully adjusted Hope's position so that her breast remained modestly covered while still allowing him to nurse. "His name is Hope, and he is my son." Stone Bear's gaze fixed on her with undisguised hatred. "You are nothing but a vessel of corruption, white woman. Your milk has poisoned Comanche blood. The child can never be pure again." "Pure?" Charlotte stood slowly, cradling Hope against her chest. The baby had finished nursing and was looking up at the towering canyon walls with innocent curiosity. "What's pure about letting an infant starve to death? What's pure about murdering a child for the crime of being loved?" "You do not understand our ways," another warrior spat. "The blood must remain untainted." Charlotte stepped forward, and the spring's pearlescent glow seemed to intensify around her. "I understand plenty. I understand that this baby was dying when his father brought him to me. I understand that my milk gave him life when your precious traditions would have given him death. And I understand that any god worth worshiping would choose compassion over cruelty." Stone Bear's hand moved to his tomahawk, but the elder's voice stopped him cold. "Hold." The ancient man's eyes were like obsidian chips. "Blood may not be spilled in this place. If you seek to claim the child, you must do so according to the old laws." "What old laws?" Stone Bear demanded. "The test of truth," the elder replied. "Both sides will state their case before the sacred spring. The spirits will judge who speaks truly, and their decision will be final and binding." Stone Bear's scarred face twisted with frustration. "This is not a matter for spirits to decide. The war chief has spoken." "The war chief's authority ends where the sacred ground begins," the elder cut him off. "Will you submit to the judgment of the ancestors, Or will you dishonor yourself by refusing? Charlotte saw the trap. Stone Bear couldn't refuse the test without appearing to reject the spiritual authority of his own people. The warrior's jaw worked with suppressed rage, but finally he nodded curtly. I will speak for tribal law and tradition, he said. And I will speak for love and motherhood, Charlotte replied without hesitation. The female elder gestured toward the spring. Let the accused speak first. Stone Bear stepped forward, his scarred face hard as granite. I speak for the purity of Comanche blood, unchanged since the first dawn. This woman has violated the most sacred of our laws by feeding her corrupted milk to a child of our people. The boy cannot be allowed to live with this taint upon him. He must join his ancestors while his spirit is still young enough to be cleansed. As he spoke, the spring's surface began to darken, the clear water turning muddy and turbulent. Images swirled in the depths, scenes of warfare, of children torn from their mother's arms, of hatred passed down through generations like a poisonous inheritance. I have tracked this woman and the traitor who protects her across many miles, Stone Bear continued. They have broken the oldest laws of our people. Justice demands their deaths. The water grew darker still, and Charlotte heard one of the ancient elders hiss in disapproval. Whatever the spring was showing them, it was not reflecting well on Stone Bear's words. Enough, the eldest elder said. Let the mother speak. Charlotte walked to the edge of the spring, hope still cradled in her arms. As she approached, the dark, turbulent water began to clear, growing brighter with each step she took. 3 days ago, I lost my son, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. He was born too early, too small, and died in my arms before he could even cry. I buried him next to his father, and I thought my heart would never beat again. The spring's surface shimmered, and images began to form. Charlotte holding her stillborn child, weeping over 2 graves behind the ranch house, sitting alone on the porch with empty arms and a broken heart. Then Running Wolf came to me with a dying baby, desperate for help. This little one was starving, and I had milk that served no purpose except to remind me of what I'd lost. Charlotte's voice grew stronger, more passionate. I could have turned them away. I could have let tradition and prejudice rule my heart. But when I looked at this baby, this innocent, helpless child, I saw only one thing that mattered. She paused, looking down at Hope's peaceful face. I saw life that needed to be saved. The spring blazed with light now, so bright that several of the warriors had to shield their eyes. The images in the water showed Charlotte's first feeding of Hope, the baby latching desperately to her breast, the color returning to his tiny cheeks as life flowed into him. Your warrior speaks of purity, Charlotte continued, her voice ringing with conviction. But what could be more pure than a mother's milk given freely to save a child's life? What could be more sacred than love that crosses all boundaries to nurture and protect? She moved closer to the spring, and the light grew even more intense. You say my milk has corrupted him. I say it has blessed him. Look at him. She held Hope up so all could see. Look at this beautiful, healthy, thriving child, and tell me he is corrupted. Tell me that love is less pure than hatred, that compassion is less sacred than tradition. Hope chose that moment to smile, a genuine, radiant baby smile that lit up his entire face. Even Stone Bear took an involuntary step backward at the sight. This is my son, Charlotte declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the sacred clearing. Not because I carried him in my womb, but because I chose to love him when others would have let him die. Not because we share the same blood, but because we share the same heart. The spring erupted in a column of pure silver light that reached toward the canyon rim. The ancient elders fell to their knees in reverence, and even the warriors looked awed by the display of spiritual power. When the light faded, the eldest elder slowly rose to his feet. His ancient face was transformed with wonder and something that might have been tears. The spirits have spoken, he said, his voice carrying absolute finality. They have seen into the hearts of all who stand here, and their judgment is clear. He turned to Stone Bear, whose scarred face had gone pale. You speak of purity, but your heart holds only hatred. You claim to protect tradition, but you would use it as a weapon against innocence. The elder's gaze shifted to Charlotte, and his expression softened. You, woman of another people, have shown what it means to be truly Comanche. You have demonstrated the courage of a warrior, the wisdom of an elder, and the fierce love of a mother. The spirits name you blessed, not cursed." Stone Bear's voice was a strangled whisper. "But the law is fulfilled," the elder cut him off. "The child has been judged by powers higher than any war chief. He carries the blessing of the sacred spring itself. Any who seek to harm him now will face the wrath of the ancestors." One by one, the four warriors knelt in the sand before Charlotte and Hope. Even Stone Bear, his face a mask of defeat and dawning understanding, slowly lowered himself to one knee. "Forgive us, Mother," he said, using the title of deepest respect. "We did not understand." Charlotte felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at these hardened warriors kneeling before her. "There's nothing to forgive," she said gently. "We all acted out of love. Love for our people, our traditions, our children. Now we know that love is big enough to include us all." Running Wolf moved to her side, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "The spirits have given us a great gift," he said quietly. "Not just their blessing, but the chance to build something new." The eldest elder nodded solemnly. "Go now, all of you. Return to your people and speak of what you have seen. Tell them that the old ways need not die, but they must grow to embrace new truths." As the warriors mounted their horses to begin the journey home, Stone Bear paused beside Charlotte. "The child will need a name for the tribal records," he said. "What shall I tell the council?" Charlotte looked down at Hope, then up at Running Wolf's proud face. "His name is Hope Running Wolf Whitmore," she said firmly. "He carries the heritage of all his people, Comanche and white, warrior and peacemaker." Stone Bear nodded respectfully. "It is a good name, a strong name." He mounted his horse and looked back one final time. "Live well, Mother. Live long and raise him to be a bridge between our worlds." As the warriors disappeared into the maze of red canyons, Charlotte felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The test was over. Hope was safe. And somehow, against all odds, they had found not just acceptance, but blessing in the most unlikely place. But their journey was far from over. The sacred ground had judged their hearts and found them true. But now they had to build a life together in a world that might not be as understanding as ancient spirits. The real test was just beginning. 3 months later, Charlotte stood at the edge of a settlement that had no name on any white man's map, watching the sun paint the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. The community spread before her in a natural valley, protected by red rock walls and fed by a sweetwater spring. It was a place where the lost and the seeking had found each other. Former slaves seeking freedom, displaced tribal members cast out from their bands, white settlers who had lost everything to war or drought, and mixed-blood families who belonged fully to neither world. Here, nobody asked where you came from. They only asked what you could contribute. Hope had grown strong in these months, his cheeks round and pink with health. He was sitting up now, babbling in a mixture of sounds that Charlotte swore included both English and Comanche words. Running Wolf insisted the boy was trying to say "mama" in both languages, though Charlotte thought it might just be wishful thinking. "The council is ready for us," Running Wolf said, approaching from behind. He had traded his traditional buckskins for a mix of white man's clothes and tribal accessories, denim pants, a cotton shirt, but also his grandfather's bone breastplate and the eagle feather he had earned as a young warrior. Like Hope, he embodied both worlds. Charlotte adjusted the doe-skin dress that Running Wolf's sister-in-law, Yellowbird, had made for her. It was decorated with glass beads and patterns that told the story of their journey. A white hand offering milk to a brown baby, a red canyon where spirits danced, and intertwined spirals representing the joining of two hearts. "Are you nervous?" Running Wolf asked, taking Hope from her arms and settling the baby against his hip with practiced ease. "Should I be?" Charlotte replied, smoothing her hair. Yellowbird had taught her to braid it with silver ribbons, another symbol of the merging of traditions. "The ceremony will bind us in the eyes of both your people and mine," Running Wolf said seriously. "There will be no going back." Charlotte looked at him, this man who had knelt in the dust of her ranch yard and changed her life forever, and smiled. "I've been bound to you since the moment I put Hope to my breast," she said. "This is just making it official." The settlement's council met in a large cabin built from red stone and timber, with a fire pit in the center where members of different tribes and backgrounds could share smoke and stories. Tonight, representatives from 5 different groups were present. The Cherokee elder who had founded the settlement, a former Buffalo soldier named Marcus who served as the community's sheriff, 2 white families who had been driven from their homes by raiders, and Yellowbird representing the small band of Comanche who had made their home here. Charlotte's heart pounded as they entered, Hope gurgling happily in Running Wolf's arms. She had been married once before, in a white church with all the proper ceremonies, but this felt more significant somehow, more real. "We gather tonight," said Joseph Ridge, the Cherokee elder, "to witness the joining of 2 souls who have already proven their commitment through trial by fire." His weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "Running Wolf, you have chosen a woman of courage who saved your son's life at great risk to her own. Charlotte, you have chosen a man of honor who would walk through flames to protect his family." The ceremony itself was unlike anything Charlotte had experienced. There were no prayers to the Christian God of her childhood, but there were invocations to the Great Spirit that governed all life. There were no wedding rings, but Running Wolf and Charlotte each wore a bracelet made from braided sweetgrass, leather, and hair from Thunder's mane, symbols of the natural world that had brought them together. Yellowbird stepped forward with a clay bowl filled with clear water from the sacred spring. "This water blessed your union in the Red Canyons," she said in accented English. "Now it blesses your marriage in the eyes of the living." Charlotte and Running Wolf each drank from the bowl, then wet their fingers and touched them to Hope's forehead. The baby laughed and reached for the pretty bowl, making everyone chuckle. "By the power of earth and sky, by the blessing of the spirits who guided your path, by the witness of this community that has welcomed you both," Joseph Ridge declared, "I pronounce you husband and wife, partners in all things, united until the stars fall from their places in the sky." The celebration that followed lasted until nearly dawn. Marcus played a fiddle while Yellowbird's husband drummed, creating music that belonged to no single tradition, but somehow felt perfectly right. Children ran between the dancers, their laughter mixing languages and joy in equal measure. Charlotte found herself swept into dances she had never learned but somehow knew, her feet finding rhythms that seemed to come from the earth itself. When Hope grew fussy from all the excitement, Charlotte stepped outside into the cool night air to nurse him. She had just settled onto a log bench when Running Wolf found her, carrying 2 cups of the sweet tea Yellowbird had made from desert herbs. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her. Charlotte looked down at Hope, nursing contentedly at her breast, then up at the star-filled sky. "More than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now, ... Now you're the heart of a community that didn't exist before you came," Running Wolf finished. "Do you know what they call you?" Charlotte shook her head. "Milk Mother," he said softly. "Not just because you nursed Hope, but because you fed half the babies in this settlement. Every woman who's had trouble with her milk, every orphan who needed comfort, they all come to you." It was true. Word had spread quickly about Charlotte's gift, and soon mothers were traveling from other settlements to seek her help. She had become something between a wet nurse, a midwife, and a healer, teaching women techniques her own mother had taught her, while learning new ones from the tribal women who shared their knowledge freely. "I never thought I'd be a mother," Charlotte admitted. "After losing my first baby, then Thomas, I thought that part of my life was finished. And now?" Charlotte shifted Hope to her other breast, smiling at his contented sighs. "Now I'm mother to dozens. Every child in this settlement knows they can come to me if they're hurt or scared or hungry. It's not the life I planned, but it's better than anything I could have imagined." Running Wolf set down his tea and pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden carving of a woman holding a baby to her breast. The work was exquisite, capturing every detail from the tenderness in the woman's face to the tiny fingers of the nursing child. "I made this for you," he said, suddenly shy. "A wedding gift." Charlotte turned the carving over in her hands, marveling at the skill and love that had gone into every line. "It's beautiful. It's us, isn't it? It's every mother and child who ever found love where they least expected it," Running Wolf said. "I want Hope to have it someday, so he'll always remember the woman who saved his life." Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes. He'll remember on his own. You both changed my life as much as I changed yours. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue inside, while Hope finished nursing and drifted off to sleep in Charlotte's arms. The baby's face was peaceful, his breathing deep and even. He had grown so much since that desperate day when Running Wolf had carried him to her porch, more dead than alive. "What do you think he'll become?" Charlotte asked quietly. "A bridge," Running Wolf said without hesitation. "Between the old ways and the new, between red and white, between the world as it was and the world as it should be." He reached over to stroke Hope's soft cheek. "He carries the blood of warriors and the milk of compassion. He'll be stronger for both." "And us?" Running Wolf's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close. "We'll watch him grow, raise more children if the spirits bless us, and build something here that our grandchildren can be proud of." As if summoned by his words, Yellowbird appeared in the doorway. "Charlotte," she called softly, "there's a woman here from the Johnson settlement. Her baby won't take her milk, and she's heard about your gift. Can you help?" Charlotte looked at Hope, sleeping so peacefully in her arms, then at Running Wolf, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course," she said, rising carefully so as not to wake the baby. "Bring her to our cabin. I'll meet with her there." As they walked back toward their new home, a sturdy structure of stone and timber that Running Wolf had built with help from the other men in the settlement, Charlotte reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a childless widow sitting alone on a broken porch. Now she was a wife, a mother, and the heart of a community that looked to her for guidance and comfort. "Do you ever miss it?" Running Wolf asked as they reached their door. "Your old life?" Charlotte considered the question seriously. She missed Thomas, would always miss him. She missed the certainty of the world she had grown up in, where the rules were clear and everyone knew their place. But she didn't miss the loneliness, the sense that her life was over at 26, the ache of empty arms and purposeless days. "I miss parts of it," she said finally, "but I wouldn't go back, not for anything." Hope stirred in her arms, and Charlotte realized he was getting heavier every day. Soon he would be walking, talking, getting into the kind of trouble that all healthy boys found. The thought filled her with joy rather than worry. Inside their cabin, she laid Hope in the cradle Running Wolf had carved from juniper wood, decorated with symbols of protection from both cultures. The baby settled with a contented sigh, one tiny fist curled near his face. "Sleep well, my little bridge builder," Charlotte whispered, brushing a kiss against his forehead. "Tomorrow we'll start building the world you're meant to inherit." Outside their window, the celebration continued, voices raised in songs that blended languages and traditions into something entirely new. And somewhere in the red canyons beyond the settlement, Charlotte imagined the ancient spirits watching over them all, pleased with the seeds of change that had been planted in sacred ground. Love had conquered law, compassion had triumphed over tradition, and from the ashes of everything they had lost, a new kind of family had been born, one that would grow to span cultures and generations, proving that the strongest bonds are not made of blood, but of choice, sacrifice, and the courage to love beyond all boundaries. The future stretched before them like an uncharted territory, full of challenges and possibilities in equal measure. But whatever came next, they would face it together. The milk mother, the grateful warrior, and the child who carried hope for them all. 20 years later, Hope Running Wolf Whitmore stood before the territorial legislature in Santa Fe, his voice carrying the same quiet strength that had once convinced ancient spirits to bless an impossible love. "Honorable representatives," he said, his words bridging two worlds as effortlessly as his mother had once bridged two hearts. "I stand before you as living proof that family is not defined by blood, but by the courage to love when love seems impossible." In the gallery, Charlotte watched her son with pride that threatened to overflow her heart. Her hair was silver now, her hands weathered by 2 decades of delivering babies, healing the sick, and nurturing a community that had grown from a handful of outcasts to a thriving town. Running Wolf sat beside her, his own temples touched with gray, but his eyes still holding the same wonder they had carried the day she had first given milk to a dying child. Hope had become exactly what they had dreamed, a bridge between worlds. Educated in both white schools and tribal wisdom, fluent in 4 languages, equally comfortable in a boardroom or around a campfire, he had dedicated his life to building understanding between peoples who had been taught to hate each other. The woman who raised me, Hope continued, his voice carrying clearly through the legislative hall, taught me that the most radical act is not rebellion, but compassion. The most revolutionary choice is not violence, but the decision to feed a starving child, regardless of the color of their skin. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that desperate day when a Comanche warrior had knelt in her yard with a dying baby. How could she have known that one act of mercy would ripple outward through time, touching hundreds of lives? The settlement they had helped build now boasted a school that taught children in 3 languages, a hospital where Charlotte trained midwives from across the territory, and a trading post where former enemies had learned to be neighbors. It had become a model for communities throughout the West, proving that people of different backgrounds could not only coexist, but thrive together. My mother once told me, Hope said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow reached every corner of the hall, that love is the only force strong enough to break the chains of hatred that bind us to our past. Today I ask you to choose love over fear, hope over hatred, unity over division. As applause thundered through the chamber, Charlotte felt Running Wolf's hand find hers. In 30 years of marriage, through the birth of 4 more children, the challenges of building a life between cultures, and the joy of watching their community flourish, his touch had never failed to steady her. "Are you proud?" he whispered. Charlotte looked at their son, now a grown man advocating for the rights of all children to be loved and cared for, regardless of their origin. She thought of the dozens of babies she had nursed over the years, the mothers she had taught, the families she had helped heal. "I'm grateful," she whispered back. "Grateful that sometimes, when we're broken in just the right way, we become exactly who we're meant to be." Hope's speech would lead to the passage of the Territorial Adoption Act, making it legal for families to be formed by love rather than limited by blood. But more than that, it would inspire a generation of young people to see beyond the boundaries their parents had built. Some stories begin with tragedy and end with triumph. Others start with hatred and conclude with understanding. But the most powerful stories, the ones that echo through generations and change the world, begin with a simple choice. The choice to love when love seems impossible. The choice to hope when hope seems lost. The choice to give when you have nothing left to give. Charlotte had made that choice on a dusty porch 20 years ago, when she had opened her heart and her body to save a dying child. That single act of compassion had created a family, built a community, and proven that the strongest bonds are forged not in blood, but in the sacred space where 2 hearts choose to become one. What would you sacrifice to save a child who isn't your own? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that love is always stronger than fear. And remember, somewhere in the world right now, a child is waiting for someone brave enough to choose love over tradition, hope over hatred, family over fear. Will that someone be you? The next chapter of this legacy is waiting to be written. Make it count.